Hello to the audience of the Budapest International Film Festival. We are here now with the director Garin Hovannisian, director of the film I'm Not Alone. And we are also with the producer of the film, Alec Mohibian. And they are currently in Los Angeles, and they're going to have this conversation with us now. Hello to both of you.
Hello, thank you for inviting us.
Hello, hello Hungary.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity for to watch your film. You selected this film at a very early stage because we saw it and we said to ourselves, okay, we have to show this film in Hungary. And well, it is the film is about the Armenian Revolution of 2018, told from within the revolution. And from this is where I would like to start from, you know, like the film is about being there, being part of it. So I wanted to ask you, like, how was the experience of making the film while at the same time living the experience of being part of the revolution?
That's a wonderful question, Manuel, and it's a great place to start because it's important to say that, more important than this being a film, this has been our daily lives. For decades, I and my family have been living in Armenia and struggling in Armenia for democracy. And for decades, we have seen protest after protest after protest, attempted revolutions that have taken the streets of Armenia. And each time I have taken my camera and gone out onto the streets, both to participate and also to film the activity, the revolutionary activity that inevitably resulted in failure. Over the years, I filmed peaceful protests, I filmed violent protests, I filmed creative protests, old school protests. And each time the protests seemed to fizzle out as the kind of post-Soviet government of Armenia reproduced itself and became even more powerful and more powerful. So when on Easter Sunday of 2018, a man went on Facebook Live and announced that he was going to now lead a revolution and inspire the people to bring down the regime, it wasn't necessarily the case that we believed, or I believed, that this was going to be the miraculous revolution that it became. This was just our life. I picked up my camera, I went to the streets, and I started filming. And we were fortunate to capture, therefore, after many attempts and many false starts, something really spectacular that happened over the course of the next 40 days.
Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you had the will at the moment, you know, that you said, okay, this has happened before, but nevertheless, I'm going to go there. What gave you that drive, you know, if being disappointed before, like, you know, like what was the drive in you that took you there again?
I guess the most sincere answer is to say that, you know, I kind of believe in magic, and however depressing the situation was, and however depressed the people were, and however strong the analysis was that a political revolution could never happen, you still have a sense of magic. You still have a sense that somewhere buried in the hearts and minds of the people, there is a will that can be awakened. There is a volcano that can erupt. And I think that it's in the pursuit of that magic, and it's in the pursuit of that miracle that I kept going again and again to the streets. So, you know, apart from having what I think is a very fascinating film on our hands, you know, just as importantly, Manuel, it was a delight of a lifetime, and it was a satisfaction of a lifetime to finally see such a miracle happen.
but it also comes with ups and downs during the process. You know, like I guess there were moments when you thought like this is going nowhere, or as it is in the film. You know, because this is something that we also see in the film. But how was the feeling there personally while you were shooting, as director and also as a citizen of the country?
You're right. You're absolutely right. I mean, the process of going through any major political change, and I suppose the path of any success story is a path that has endless ups and downs, that has many moments where everything seems to be lost. For example, the leader of the revolution is arrested, and you think that it's absolutely over. But just then, the women activists rise up to fill the places of the men and spearhead the success of the revolution. Or you think that the police have blockaded the parliament, and there's no way to pass the police, but there is a way to pass the police. Or you wake up one morning on day 15 and you see there are only 12 people at the square. The revolution has fizzled out. The people have lost hope. And just then, through an act of creative disobedience, a spark is lit, and within a few hours, hundreds of thousands of people. And so part of living in Armenia is also realizing just how unpredictable and kind of volcanic the human spirit is, and how almost within a few hours, a sense of total depression can be transformed into dynamic excitement that can spread across the city.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The word volcano is being used by the former prime minister as well when he's saying that we have to avoid to poke on those volcanoes. Yeah, it's interesting that you have the analogy as he has the analogy when he's referring to something as a metaphor, but we know what he's talking about.
Yeah, thank you for noticing that.
And that leads me to this. I think that you have something which is very valuable in the film, is the fact that you include the opposition in the film. You include the Republican Party and the former prime minister in the film, and me as an spectator. What I was thinking all the time is like, how did you manage to get there? How was this process of getting there, and why did they agree to be part of the film?
That's a good question. And to begin answering it, I'll say it was a matter of principle that we wanted to include voices from the other side. We were very careful. We were already telling this film structurally from the perspective of the revolution and the perspective of the revolutionaries. So it was at a major risk of becoming a propaganda film already due to the structure, due to the protagonists that we were following. And of course, personally, at an emotional level, we were having trouble masking our own excitement for the great historical events that were happening. So we had to be very careful in checking ourselves. And maybe I'll let Alec, our producer, continue to answer, because he was also very insistent. We had a great movie even without those voices, but it really took a constant insistence that those voices were necessary to really pursue them. And we actually had a locked cut of the film as I was going back and trying to convince the former prime minister, the opposition, the current opposition, to give me the interview, because it wasn't an easy task. But 1 year after the revolution, just as we were about to send the film off on the festival circuit, he agreed to an interview. And I think he agreed because he sensed my sincerity. He knew the political kind of spectrum, which side of the political spectrum I was on. I didn't hide that. But I also wanted him to let him know that I wanted to make a film that, looking back on it 20 years from now, 30 years from now, I would be proud of that film regardless of what happened in Armenia, regardless of what new presidents came to power or left, that I had a responsibility before history to include those voices and to give an opportunity for those voices to come through. And also, it just makes for better drama. But Alec, do you have something to add on that score?
Well, I think it also, for the sake of the audience and for the sake of posterity, I think one can also learn from this glimpse of what the so-called dark side is actually thinking. We never know 100% whether we're right or wrong. Garin and I personally fought for this revolution for forever and believed in its rightness and still do. But when one is fighting for something, one typically mutes one's understanding of what the opponent is actually thinking. You have to you create this villain in your head that must be defeated. And that's what gets you up in the morning when the odds against you are 1,000,000 to 1. But that doesn't mean that the opponent doesn't have his own reasons. That doesn't mean that the opponent might not be right about certain things. It's important, I think, always to, especially in movies which are supposed to be this revelation of humanity, it's important to explore as much of humanity as one can in any story. So that's why it was so important to us to get not only the ousted prime minister. Of course, he was a huge coup to get on the camera, but also some of his party leaders, and also a great character in the movie, as I'm sure everyone appreciates if they've seen it already, is the police captain who kind of has experienced this classic arc. These are the most interesting. This is what I think makes cinema such a fascinating art form, is that you can, without even that many words, get a real feeling for how these people think, who they are, and why they kind of have been doing what they've been doing. And so that it meant a lot to us to be able to capture that. And I hope that it really makes the film hold up, no matter what happens to the reputations of the people involved after the revolution.
Yeah. And we have the sense of so many things happening in the film, of course, because this was a process of, if I remember well, it was 25 days of since the moment that he started marching towards Yerevan until the day of the actual revolution, let's put it that way. But and it also means that there were many things that you have to leave out. And I was curious about if there was something that that you really wanted to keep in the film, but you had to cut out. If there is something that it was like typical difficult decision that we want this, but it's not possible. So it gives us a little bit more information about what you were doing and what was happening.
Right. There was so much that was left out in order to craft the story, as in the telling of any story. Just as important as what you leave in is what you cut out. Like a sculpture. And I remember one story from the editing room, and we edited with a very powerful editor named Barry Polterman. I'd put together this treatment. I'd put together, my concept, my approach, my vision to everything. And among my favorite segments of the entire filming was the fact that I actually filmed in the room where the revolutionaries had gathered before the revolution to create charts and create these cool looking plans as to the plans of the revolution, the blueprints of the revolution. And when I was filming those blueprints in this underground office, it seemed impossible to me that this would not be in the film because it was so cool. And I thought even those blueprints could become graphic elements and they would become an important stylistic component of the film. Now, when we edited the film and we began on day one, we got straight into the story. It was the right way to begin. And about 7-8 minutes in, we have an opportunity to take a breath and to have this kind of flashback, the backstory. Now, the backstory that I wanted was this: the revolutionaries gathering in this room and planning the revolution. But the backstory that the editor was insisting on was the backstory of the protagonist, his childhood, his upbringing, his first sense of injustice, his thirst. What was the thirst? What was his desire line? And of course, through the editing process, I became very convinced that he was, of course, correct, and I was entirely wrong, and that this cool backstory of gathering in a room, however interesting it was and however wonderful it was actually much less powerful than the emotional connection that we had to build with our protagonist in order to follow him for the rest of the film.
Yeah. I'm thinking about also the one turning point in the film is when the president decides to step up and say something about what's happening, and I also wanted to ask you about how it was being there, that particular moment when the president decides, and how important was this moment for the actual process of the revolution.
It's interesting. It was definitely an important moment because it was the moment when we all realized that the movement was no longer being ignored. Suddenly there was, up until that point, even the public TV and officials were rarely even commenting that a real movement was happening. And I think that was the first official mark that the government was beginning to relent in some way. But it's an interesting question you ask, because depending on who you ask, there's a different moment. Alec may have a different answer. I may have a different answer as to what was the moment that turned everything. Like, what was the moment where you kind of realized that things were going to change? Mm-hmm. Some people would say that was the moment. I think I don't know, Alec, for you, what was the moment for you where you kind of, you were on the phone with me all the time, and I was in Armenia, Alec was in Los Angeles, and he was my external observer, and he had actually a much better understanding of what was happening than I did, who was in the middle of everything. So from your perspective, what was the moment?
I think from my perspective, it was the moment that Republic Square, the giant square in the center of Yerevan, filled up, which was, I think, a few days before the meeting between Serge and Nicole. That was that to me felt like it was something that never came close to happening in prior protests. And that signaled to me that the people had crossed the line and they weren't going to go back. So that's when I started to get optimistic about the result. And I started to see everything that happened from there, even the potentially negative things. I mean, the fact of the matter is that on the ground, I know this because I was talking to Garin, on the ground, it always seemed like everything was one step away from just falling apart, I think. I think that was the case up until the last minute. And so having some distance and having, I guess, being able to look at things in terms of patterns, I definitely could see it from the point that the Republic Square, because previously everyone would try to fill in a much smaller square called Liberty Square, which is named Liberty Square for historic reasons of protests that have succeeded there during Soviet times, but tiny compared to this giant. Yerevan is built like a, I don't know what the precise word is Garin can say, but the entire city comes out from this central square evenly. And the square is huge. And when seeing it filled was, you started to see that the people of Armenia, having long been narrators of their own defeat, had started to figure out how to become narrators of their own victory. So the defeat narration continued up until the last minute. Serge Sarkisian didn't resign after that meeting in the Marriott Hotel. Well, so much for that. Look at this. Nicole got arrested. So much for this. There's always that voice, but the other voice entered, I think, on Republic Square.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. And it is the moment when it shows that the people are actually taking their country back. Let's put it that way. And then comes the moment when Nicole Pashinyan is elected a prime minister, and then you have a moment when one Republican is saying, if there is something that I would like to say to you is don't be arrogant. I connect that to what Garin was saying, that of this film being something that you want to see in the future as well, regardless of who are the presidents that are going to come after. And I also see it as something as this balance that you wanted to create between this, including this information from the Republican Party and the opposition. And indeed, it was not difficult for the president after what happened last year, the conflict with Azerbaijan. So, how has it been, since the moment that you stopped filming until now, your relationship with both him and the film?
First, Manuel, you continue to find the quiet pivot points of the film, and you make a great observation. That is exactly the moment when we're doing something important as filmmakers. Toward the end of the film, there are fireworks that go off, and we can choose to end the film with the fireworks and choose to end the film with this feeling, this inspiring feeling, which would probably even help the film in terms of its commercial impact. But we choose also as filmmakers to continue the film beyond those fireworks. And as Nicole Pashinyan is becoming elected as prime minister, for us structurally, as filmmakers, to switch sides from the revolution, as the revolutionaries come to power, we come back to the opposition. And structurally, we bring in the voices like the Republican you mentioned, who give warnings to the revolutionaries who came to power, telling them not to be arrogant, telling them that they too will go one day. And I think that's important because while we can't see the future is change. No government will last. And I think if you're a responsible filmmaker making a film about politics, you have to build into your film not just the possibility, but the inevitability of change. And so, I think we knew that Armenia was going to change one way or another after, and of course it did. It did as a result, in this case, of a war in which, Armenia suffered a heartbreaking loss, in, which, because of which the people of Armenia are, of course, holding its own government politically accountable for that loss. So, a lot of what happened in Armenia after the revolution has complicated the positive feelings of the revolution. I mean, it's important to say that the revolutionaries who came to power didn't become corrupt billionaire oligarchs as they could have, as they have done in other countries. So that there has been no, there's been no need to backtrack from that message. But yes, a lot has changed. A lot will continue to change. But I think the meaning of this film is a film about 40 days. It's about 40 days that happened in the history of Armenia that became more than a history, that became a kind of parable. And regardless of what happens in the ongoing history of Armenia, which will be full of ups, full of downs, we come from genocides and wars, we come from kingdoms and successes, and who knows what tragedies and what victories lie ahead for us. But those 40 days are something that we will always be able to return to and to see, the true capacity of the human spirit and what a people can do when they're united in a common vision. And I think we all know by now, as we all come from political countries, we've all witnessed in our lifetimes vast political processes. Even as the revolution was happening, even as those fireworks were exploding, we did not have the idealistic, naive view that we were going to live happily ever after. Freedom, like all the most beautiful things in life, like all the most precious feelings in life, isn't something that's just achieved once and you get to keep it. It's something that you achieve and you lose and you re-achieve and you fight for and you struggle for. The struggle for freedom is a lifelong struggle. It's a centuries-long struggle, and we're honored to be a part of that.
I have the feeling that since we don't get too much information coming from Armenia, because we know, there's all this information coming from the big information hubs in the world, basically, the big countries and the rich countries and so on. I have the feeling that we don't really have a clear balance of what has happened in Armenia. I do feel that the information is quite basic, and what we hear is that we knew about the revolution, but then afterwards we only heard about the president as being a populist president. But there's nothing in between, and that's something that I wanted to ask you, what's the image that people actually have of Pashinyan nowadays in Armenia, that you guys have of him, and what's the real situation there without these adjectives and this reductionism of being like this or like that, which I think we actually get from about Armenia.
Alec, how would you describe it?
Well, I'm not an expert on the people's feelings about Pashinyan throughout 2 years. I think that for better and worse. First of all, I want to say that I have a problem personally with the way in which the kind of media complex of the world categorizes every single figure in this very kind of standard way or flat way of you're a populist, you're a this, right wing, left. There's a very, it's an almost American imperial way of looking at the world, where everyone must fit into the categories that appear on CNN talk shows. Everything is more the same. I'm sure is the case in Hungary. Everything is more complex than that, and I think country has its own gallery of categories and roles. Nikol Pashinyan is Nikol Pashinyan. Is he a populist? In many ways, yes. In many ways, I mean, he's the guy who came into power by inspiring enough people to go to the streets. And he did it on Facebook. He did it on live streams on Facebook, and he kept that tradition alive during his rule. Anytime there's been a major event, politically or even minor event during the pandemic, his tactic has been to go on Facebook Live and explain his thinking and explain what's going on to the people. And that's how he's maintained, even now, he's maintained a level of trust and popularity among a certain segment of the population, much smaller than it was before the war, because the war was such a disaster. So he has been a populist in that respect, in the respect of transparency, in the respect of definitely requiring his support to come from the people, not from political forces that he has cleverly accumulated behind him. For better or worse, he hasn't really done that. He has his own his team of close the people that were in the revolution mainly, and some others. And that's where a lot of criticism of him comes in, because he hasn't expanded his governance, his team of governance, to include more people, to include more capable minds, and the best that Armenia has to offer. So it's a little bit of both. In terms of what he's actually been doing, he's not somebody who polls the people for every decision he does. He's been pursuing what he said he would do in terms of corruption, made perhaps even too far at the expense of other considerations. He's been single-mindedly pursuing the oligarchs and putting them in jail and getting money back to the state coffers and so on. He's been doing that very doggedly, which is what he was brought to power to do, but perhaps at the expense of other state considerations. So it's a complicated issue, but I think populism is a valid way of looking at his style, his appeal, but it's not. There could be some more nuance there. Mm-hmm.
Garin, do you have anything to add?
We can go as deep into the internal politics as you like. Armenia is fresh in the heartbreak of this war, and in figuring out how emotionally and politically as a people we are to overcome this war. And the basic dynamic is the following. Nikol Pashinyan, as the leader of the government that essentially suffered defeat in the war, is being called to political responsibility for his running of that war. And there is quite a bit of unrest and quite a bit of a popular opposition to him and to hold him accountable. At the same time, he continues to have a lot of strong supporters who continue to believe in his anti-corruption methods and who are very concerned that the loss of this war is giving an opportunity to the old regime to use the loss of this war to come to power. And a lot of the faces that are associated with the movement against Nikol Pashinyan right now are either directly the faces of the former regime or people connected to them. So it's a very complicated mixture of people who are very reasonably want to hold the government accountable, plus perhaps darker forces at work who are capitalizing on the moment to come back. We won't know the truth, I think, for a long time to come, but we do know that it's quite complicated.
I should add that for the sake of the people kind of following from this point on, it looks like there will be a snap parliamentary elections this year in Armenia in order to hold the government accountable and to keep public unrest, to sort of regulate public unrest and give them a chance to re-express their political will. And that's going to be a very interesting test of what really has changed in the political structure of Armenia, in the sense of, will these elections be free and fair? Who will the people vote for? Will the old regime find a new life of significant amount of seats or not? It's actually, we might be looking at the first major true test, because an election following a revolution is free as it was. It's a euphoric situation. It's not a typical test of power, test of governance situation. This is going to be quite a test. So it'll be interesting to see what happens this year.
Yes, indeed. As the whole situation has been interesting from beginning to end. But the most important part is what you showed with your film, the revolution, and what we live after that is another story, but the revolution itself is something that is very important for the country. I want to thank you both, Alec and Garin, for being with us. Thank you for this conversation, and thank you for giving us the opportunity here in Hungary to watch your film. And we hope for the best, of course, there and here.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's been a real pleasure. Of course, we would have liked to meet you in person and engage the audiences in Hungary in person. But this was definitely a pleasure, and thank you for the opportunity to tell our story to your audience.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel.
Thank you.
Okay, guys. Thank you and my best wishes, and thanks to the audience who watched this conversation with the director and producer of I'm Not Alone. The film, you can watch it after the film's premiere. You can watch it for the whole duration of the festival at any time, and you can also watch this conversation with director and producer of the film at any time during the duration of the festival. Thank you for being with us.